Everyone. We are now in lesson 4, Modes of Classroom Assessment. We have two general modes of assessment. One is traditional assessment, and the second one is alternative assessment. When we say traditional assessment, it is more on the paper and pencil tests, like multiple choice, fill in the blanks, true or false. And usually, traditional assessments are objective in nature. When you say objective, there is a correct answer. And this assessment, the traditional assessment, is more on the mastery level. On the other hand, alternative assessment is not the traditional assessment or not traditional tests. We have different forms of alternative assessments. One is performance-based assessment, which is more on the skills. It's assessing the skills. It could be the process or the product. And then authentic assessment, it's assessing the real life applications. And portfolio assessment, it is more on documenting the progress of the learner with reflection. In terms of performance-based assessment, we have two types, the demonstration type or the process performance-based assessment, and the creation type, which is the product performance-based assessment. There are 7 criteria in selecting performance tasks. One is generalizability. The performance on tasks will generalize to comparable tasks. Like for example, if you are able to multiply numbers, then eventually you can divide. Or if you can add numbers, then you can multiply. Authenticity. The task is similar to encounter in the real world, or the tasks are realistic. It's practical. And then multiple foci. There are multiple outcomes. So if you have an activity, then you have different objectives that you can target. Now, in the classroom, we usually give one activity that can measure all the objectives that we have already, which is usually given at the end of the quarter or maybe at the end of the unit. Teachability. It is more on mastering the skill to be proficient. So our task must be more on mastering the skill for the learners to be proficient. It should be teachable. And then, fifth, it's feasible or feasibility. It's doable in relation to cost, time, and materials. And the number 6 is scorability. So it's reliable and accurate in terms of evaluation. So it's better if it's easily scored. And fairness. It should be fair regardless of gender and social status. We have different types of scoring instrument. One is checklist. The rater checks the observed characteristics. So it's like looking into observe or not observe, and then you check if it's observed. If it's not observed, then you check the not observed, or yes or no. If there, if it's yes, then you check the yes. If it's a no, then you check the no. Second is rating scale. The rating scale measures the extent or degree of a trait. Example, if you have a Likert scale, usually have 5 or 7 agree or disagree scale. Like you have strongly agree, strongly disagree, agree, disagree, and then neutral, something like that. And number three, rubric. It's usually used to rate the performance tasks. So performance tasks are usually rated using rubrics. We have two types of rubrics. One is the holistic rubric. The holistic rubric is used when you have limited time and you are looking into the overall performance. So it's general. If you have analytic rubric, it's very detailed because it's specific and it usually describes the quality of the performance, meaning you can see the different criteria. Example, we have here an example of a holistic rubric, meaning all the criteria are given in with one score. Like for example, you can get a 4 if the food is perfectly cooked, the presentation surpasses expectations, and the recipient is kept exceptionally comfortable throughout the meal. So the cooking, the presentation, and the acceptability of the or the comfort of the customer is usually taken as one, and you can score a 4. So you can also have 3, 2, 1, depending on like if the food is cooked poorly, you can have the 2. If it's correctly cooked but not perfectly, that's a 3, something like that. And then this is an example of an analytic rubric. As you can see, the analytic rubric, the different criterion or criteria, I mean food, presentation, and comfort, are being separated from one another, which is different from the holistic rubric, wherein they are taken as one. As you can see, this is an analytic rubric. And then the portfolio assessment usually goes into the different process. So usually it goes with setting goals. So you have an objective. And then after having that objective, you collect data. After collecting the data, you select and then organize. And you reflect, evaluate, and then confer or exhibit. Usually, if you are, uh, there are different types of a portfolio. So you have different uh, ways on dealing with it dependent on the type of portfolio that you will have. As long as you can be able to select what you need to place there and reflect on it. Mm. So these are the different types of portfolio. One is what we call as working slash progress slash development portfolio. This type of portfolio has the day-to-day works of the learner, which reflects learning. So you place everything that you have, so the different artifacts that you have day to day that will show your progress will be placed on a working progress or development type portfolio. If you want to just show the best works or those where you got high scores, where you have the best remarks, then you can have a showcase portfolio. If you want to have the combination of the day-to-day artifacts and the best works, you can have a documentary portfolio for that. But if you just want to document your learning, you can have an evaluation or assessment type of portfolio. But there are different scoring biases and errors that we have. One is generosity error. Usually we overrate. The student may underperform, but you still give a high grade. Example, if you have a rubric of from 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and usually your scores are on the 5, the highest one. Severity error, severity error is the opposite. It's more on the underrating. Like if you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 the highest and 1 as the lowest, then most of your scores are into 1 and 2. Central tendency error. Central tendency error is usually than if you are passive. So the scores of the students are at the middle. So if you have one, two, three, four, five, then you usually have the threes. You're neutral, something like that. Or if you have it in a scale of 100, usually the teacher will give a grade of 85, 85. Because the most severe is 70, 75, and the most generous scores you have 98, 99, 100. And halo effect is more on the impression, no? So everything that we do, if the impression of the teacher is that you are very intelligent, it goes throughout. Even though there are times that you do not perform well, you're still intelligent. The impression affects the grading. So let's try to answer these questions for us to really determine what really are the differences of the different modes of assessment so that we can go deeper. Mr. Uno is doing a performance-based assessment in his lesson. Which of the following is expected to happen in his classroom? A. Students are evaluated in one setting. B. Students do an actual demonstration of the skill. C. Students are evaluated suing objective test. And D. Students are evaluated in varied forms. You have here performance-based assessment. If you say performance, it implies skill. So which of the choices talks about the skill? It's letter B. Students do an actual demonstration of their skill. Okay, how about this one? Teacher Joan would like to rate her students in terms of the appropriate use of the microscope and their ability to follow the specified procedures. What mode of assessment is suited to her objective? A.Portfolio, B. Traditional, C. Performance, D. Alternative. Here, the objective is the appropriate use of the microscope and their ability to follow procedures. So it's talking about the skills. So the answer here is performance-based assessment, letter C. Which statement about performance-based assessment is true? A. It emphasizes merely on process. B. It is more on knowing rather than doing. Letter C. It involves process and product. Letter D. It is better than traditional paper and pencil tests. Which is true. When you say performance-based assessment, it could be process or product. So it is letter C. It involves process and product. Which is incorrect about traditional assessment? A. It can fairly assess all domains. B. It can assess students objectively. C. It is easy to administer. Letter D. It can be done in a short period of time since it can be done at the same time, which is incorrect, not true. It's letter A. It can fairly assess all the domains. The traditional assessment cannot assess the behavioral and also the affective domains. It is more on the cognitive domains. But letter B, letter C, and letter D are true about traditional assessment. So take note, traditional assessment can assess students objectively. It is easy to administer and it can be done in a short period of time. Take note of that. That's traditional assessment. Teacher Aim uses alternative assessment in her lessons. Which of the following will she not likely use? Portfolio, oral presentation, journal writing, or multiple choice test? Take note. Which of the following will she not likely use if she is into alternative assessment? So we're looking for traditional assessment here. So it's letter D. Multiple choice test belongs to the traditional assessment, while portfolio, oral presentation, and journal writing belongs to the alternative. So the answer is letter D, multiple choice test. Which is incorrect about traditional assessment? A. It can fairly assess all domains. B. It can assess students objectively. C. It is easy to administer. D. It can be done in a short period of time since it can be done at the same time. I think this was given already. This one. Which statement is true about performance-based assessment? A. It emphasizes merely on process. B. It is more on knowing rather than doing. C. It involves process and product. Letter D. It is better than traditional paper and pencil test. Also, I think this was done already, and the answer is letter C. Portfolio assessment is based on which of the following assumptions? What do you think? Assumptions. Which is assumed. Why are we using portfolio assessment? Because okay, A. Assessment is an integral part of the teaching and learning process. Letter B. Learning is inadequately characterized by a test score. Letter C. Portfolio is a self-assessment tool. Letter D. Portfolio assessment is a fair assessment, which is an assumption. Letter C. Portfolio is a self-assessment tool is a fact. It's not an assumption. We know that portfolio is a self-assessment tool. The correct answer is letter B. Learning is inadequately characterized by a test score. That's our assumption. That's why we are using portfolio because we know that our traditional assessment cannot measure all the domains, and the test scores only implies cognitive domain, while we cannot measure the behavioral and the affective domains. Letter A is a guiding principle in assessment, right? We had that in lesson 2. Which of the following should be done first in portfolio assessment? Always start with letter B, clear objectives, always. In everything that we do, we start with objectives. Even we have a lesson plan or we have a TOS, we usually start with objectives. How about this one? Assessment is said to be authentic when the teacher blank. When you say authentic, it's real life. Which of this it talks about real life? Okay, letter D. Authentic assessment gives students real life tasks to accomplish. So when you say authentic, it's real life, which is not a characteristic of authentic assessment. So, or which is not more on the real life. Letter C, easy to complete, because easy to complete is on the traditional assessment. A, B, and D are the characteristics of authentic assessment. So authentic assessment is focused on lifelike, meaningful, relevant types of student learning. Authentic assessment offers opportunities to study problem intensively. And authentic assessment is fruitful in terms of genuine learning. Which of the following examples of alternative assessment? So not paper and pencil. Letter B, portfolio, exhibits, journals. For letter A, you have their paper and pencil, so it's traditional. For letter C, you have their alternative response test. When you say alternative response test or alternate response test, it's true or false. And for letter D, multiple choice, it's traditional. Mr. Yu has to make a scoring rubric for students' output. However, he has limited time to evaluate their work. What type of rubric is appropriate? If you have limited time, you just have to score one. So it's more on the holistic rubric, because you have a limited time. Take note, if it's limited time and you just have the general one, that's holistic rubric. Teacher Anne wants to assess the entire contents of the portfolio submitted by his students. What assessment tools should she use? A. Rubrics. B. Checklist. C. Likert scale. D. Observation. Take note, assess the entire contents of the portfolio. So it's more on the rubrics, because the rubrics could have the analytic rubric wherein all the criteria can be seen. Because if you just have a checklist, it's just a yes or a no, or observe and non-observe. If it's Likert scale, you just have strongly agree, agree, neutral, disagree, and strongly disagree, something like that. If a teacher has set objectives in all domain or learning targets, which could be assessed using a single performance task, what criterion in selecting a task did she consider? Take note. You have set of objectives in all domain, which could be assessed using one performance task. That is multiple foci, because you can have multiple objectives or multiple outcomes in one activity. Next, if Mr. Paraiso will have to make a scoring rubric for students' output, what format is better to construct, considering that the teacher has limited time to evaluate their work? Limited time, holistic rubric, limited time. The school principal has three teacher applicants, all of whom graduated from the same institution and are licensed teachers. She only needs to hire one. What should she do to choose the best teacher from the three? Give them a placement test, interview them, let them demonstrate, study their portfolio. If you are the principal, take note they are licensed teachers already, so there's no need to give them a placement test. You just have to interview them, let them demonstrate, and then look into their portfolio. Therefore, it's 2, 3, and 4, letter D. Who among the teachers below gave the most authentic assessment task for the objective solve word problems involving the four basic operations? The answer is letter D. Mrs. Ponteperdra, who asked her pupils to construct, so ask the pupils to construct any word problem that involves the four fundamental operations, then form them by twos so that each pair exchange problems and help solve each other's problems. So it's realistic, because we are more on sharing our problem and letting somebody help us on solving our problems in real life. Which is the true of an analytic rubric? Time consuming, easier to construct, gives one's level of performance per criterion, it allows one to pinpoint the strengths and weaknesses to one's work. Not true of an analytic rubric. The correct is letter B. It is easier to construct than holistic. Take note, analytic rubric is detailed. Therefore, it is not easier to construct than holistic rubric. So it is true that analytic rubric is time consuming, and then it can pinpoint the strengths and weaknesses of one's work, and it gives one's level of performance per criterion because it is detailed. No, it's specific. The holistic rubric is general, so it's easy to construct. Mrs. Bacani prepared a rubric with 5 levels of performance described in 5 excellent, 4 very satisfactory, 3 satisfactory, 2 needs improvement, 1 poor. After using this rubric with these descriptions, she found out that most of her students had a rating of 3. Even those who are evidently poor in their performance had a rating of satisfactory. Wrong spelling. Could. So there's a U there. Could there be a possible error in the use of the rubric? A. Yes, the teacher could have committed a generosity error. B. Yes, the teacher could have committed the central tendency source of error. C. No, it's just common to see more of the students having a grade of 3 in a 5-point scale. Letter D. No, such result is acceptable as long as it has a positive consequence to the students. Take note, most of the students had a score of 3 out of 5. Therefore, most of the scores are in the middle. If it's in the middle, it is central tendency errors. Letter B. So here we can have the summary. So we just have here traditional, performance, and portfolio. For the traditional, it's more on the objective paper and pencil tests. So examples of traditional assessment, you have standardized tests, teacher-made tests. And then advantages, it's objective and easy to administer. Disadvantage, it's the preparation time is it's time consuming and it's prone to cheating. If you have a performance-based assessment, it requires actual demonstration of skills or creation of products. Examples, you have a practical test, an oral and oral test, and then projects. Advantages, it's relatively easy to prepare, measures behaviors that cannot be deceived. And then scoring tends to be subjective. That's a disadvantage without rubrics. And the administration of the test is time consuming. Portfolio, it is a process of gathering multiple indicators of students' progress. So you can have working, show, documentary. Advantages, measure students' growth and development. It's intelligence fair because it looks at all the intelligences, not only one. And the disadvantage, it's time consuming to develop, and the rating tends to be subjective without the rubrics. Like similar to the performance assessment. That's all. Thank you.